Hey guys, Tim here again. Got a tip on how I limit and how I master my master tracks for my audio promos, sweepers, liners, DJ drops, whatever you want to call them. So basically this is how I finalize before I render off my track and to its destination source. So one, I've sort of got in mind like, okay, where is this going and what sort of format it's going to be broadcast over, because in some cases you'll find that material that if you're doing work for a radio station, for example, they're going to have some kind of compression and expansion running at the same time over their broadcast signal to try and clamp everything down and keep it within a certain range. So you might find that if you over compress or over limit your own audio, it's going to sound kind of weird as it comes out the other side. So I bear that in mind. In some cases, my material that I send out is not going to get processed at all other than compression, and I mean by frequency compression over the internet as a streaming cast, for example. So leave that one aside at the moment. So knowing that it's not going to be processed, it's just going to be played as it stands alongside music as it is. And that's another thing to bear in mind too. These days with the loudness wars, you're going to end up with music that's heavily compressed and your material is going to get sort of lost in the middle if you're not careful with it. So you don't want a DJ to have to ride faders because one, it doesn't sound good as it would if everything's just flowing together. It sounds a lot better on the ear and it's a lot more consistent. Okay, so you kind of got to level match yourself. And maybe a good thing to do is to, once you've rendered this off, is throw it into iTunes with Soundcheck off or your MP3 player, whatever it is, and get an idea of how they sound alongside the format, you know, whatever genre you choose in music and how you choose to produce it. So the idea today is just to give you guys a little bit of a tip on limiting, my approach to it. So when you think of a limiter, it's kind of similar to compression, but you're literally throwing your audio and driving it into a brick wall. Okay, so the amount that you drive it into the brick wall depends on how it's going to sound at the other end. So we're actually lifting the overall volume and pushing it up into the ceiling of that brick wall. So in this case, I've just got a basic limiter that came with GarageBand, I think. So any DAW is going to have a limiter built into it that you can use over and I've got this here obviously over the master channel. Okay, so this is set for a fast attack time, 0.5 of a millisecond, which means that it's going to grab the audio pretty quickly. Okay, so if I had a slower attack time, it's not going to grab those peaks as quickly. It's going to let a few through before it starts grabbing it. This one here has got a release time, nice and simple, only three dials. So the release time is how long it's going to hold on to that audio before it lets it go for the next peak. So, you know, typically, well, let's just throw it up on 3 milliseconds. So that way it's got a little bit of time to hold on to it and kind of keep things a lot more consistent. And then here we've also got a pre-gain, which is basically drive. You know, how hard are you going to drive your audio signal that you've got currently into that brick wall? So this has basically a little peak limiter graph. There you go. It's like a history, so it gives you an idea of how hard you've driven it. And this is a limiting amount, so by decibels. So I don't really want it going too high at all, just from experience. But I'll give you an idea if we just play this through and get an idea of what's actually going on. What you might have seen up here actually is a little bit of sheen, because I know with limiting and compression you do lose a little bit of your top end, so I just want to add a little bit of that back. So I'll play it to you as it stands. Let's just turn that off for a second and give you an idea.
Optimod says low gravity gets you high on life.
Sounds good, right? Cool, it does. That's Rich Goyette and his PR, Heil PR40. So good friend of mine sent that to me, which is cool. So I use this. This is a sweeper I made for myself. So it's I can do with whatever I like, but I know what I like. That's the good thing to know. Got to know what you like. Okay, so let's turn this one on and take a listen, obviously with your ears, but at the same time take a note down here in the master section what's actually happening with the audio, how long it's staying closer to that highest output level, and watch what's happening when we drive it.
Optimod says low gravity gets you high on life.
See how we really slammed that? and it didn't really sound that great, but it gives you an idea of how hard you can push that audio, and it just says, I'm stopping right here and I'm not going any further. So this stayed green for a long time. So that's not really what I like. So let's go back here where the vocal kicks in again and just adjust it to something that's a lot more pleasing, but still giving us more impact and a better result.
Optimod says, low gravity gets you high on life.
See, I think that sounds good right there. So we'll listen to the whole thing.
Optimod says, low gravity gets you high on life.
See the difference in the AB there, turning it on and turning it off? It disappears. So what this will help us do is to keep our audio far more consistent than what it is. Now you can take this a little bit further. I've got another really cool tool here that I use quite often, and this is called the BXXL. It's by Brainworks. So it's a mid-side mastering limiter. Now this has got so many buttons and faders and sliders and all sorts of things all over it. So there's a lot of cool things that you can do. You can separate out the mid signal, so everything that you've panned straight down the middle, typically your vocal, bass drum, anything kind of mono, kick, anything that's solid down the middle is typically where you're going to put that. So if it's a big boomy roll or whatever it might be. So that'll process that right down the middle in this mid-high section or mid-low, depending on the frequency. And this is the crossover for it here as to whether it's going to be mid-high or mid-low. You've got a sidechain mix that you can dial in how much, and you, let's just show you, soloing the sidechain.
Optimod says, low gravity gets you high on life.
I see that. So you're actually processing the sidechain signal. So again, it's another way of boosting a certain amount of signal and what it is that you actually want to boost, and you can dial it in by listening to it. Is it more mid or is it more side in this particular case? But you can change these. See? So that's pretty cool. So that just gives you more control again over what part of the signal you actually want to affect, as does the gain and the threshold. This is like a compression. Okay, this is a compression setup here. And then over here, depending on how hard you drive it by the input, just pushing it up as to how much limiting you're going to get. This one over here, if you've seen it as well, is a what they call a stereo width. So that's kind of cool because it spreads out your stereo field even further. It kind of makes it sound like it's coming out of the speakers that, wider than what your speakers actually are if you're sitting in the stereo field. So really kind of cool. So in this particular case here, I can give you a difference between just the limiter that comes with GarageBand, for example, or whatever, just a basic limiter, and then something just a little bit more special. So let's have a play with this one, and not just solo anything out, but listen to the whole thing.
Optimod says, low gravity gets you high on life.
And you've got a really good representation here of what's actually going on, how much compression you're actually doing to the overall signal in its particular areas. So you could see the voice over here getting up to about plus 3 dB worth of compression. And then obviously down here as well, where your limiting kicks in of your overall signal. So you can drive that as hard as you need to get it to go up there. Okay, and you can hear it when I turn it off and turn it on as to how different it sounds. I'll do it again for you.
Optimod says, low gravity gets you high on life.
See how everything just lifts up and it boosts everything. So again, that's the basics of limiting. This is probably the more surgical and more defined end of how things can go. And you certainly don't need to do it that way. And you could be just better off just by playing around with this. And I've done plenty of promos and plenty of sweepers just with a basic limiter, just to bring the level up to what's more consistent. Because what you'll find is each mix, because of its different elements, it'll have different parts, and it'll just sound different. It'll come out with a different overall volume depending on the dynamics of what you've done. So this just helps squeeze those dynamics together and give yourself a much better consistent product that obviously the person at the other end is going to find a lot easier to work with. So I hope that helps. If there's any questions that maybe I haven't quite covered something so well, just drop a line down below and I'll hopefully be able to help you out, or even stick up another video on something a little bit more specific. But again, the BrainWorks BXXL, that's something you have to purchase from BrainWorks. But again, you know, let's just look at this basic limiter. That's something that's going to serve you quite well. It depends how far you want to take it. But using some limiting, very good idea. And you know what? Next time you're out doing some of this kind of stuff, do some comparisons. Do some comparisons with what maybe you've heard, or even just the music, and take a visual look at what you're pull up an EQ, something that's got a visual display of the frequency response, or even just open up a waveform and have a look at how solid a block your limiting is in comparison to the music that's played if you drag a music file into the DAW, and just look at what the dynamics look like, how much of a solid line they are along here, or how much of movement there is. And that'll also give you a visual representation, which may be a little bit easier as to how your product actually turns out. But in the meantime, guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully it hasn't been too long. And happy mixing. We'll catch you next time. Cheers.